talking about the second of Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea novels, The Tombs of Atuan. There are two kinds of ignorance, and in the first Earthsea book, Wizard of Earthsea, Le Guin explores the more common kind, the kind that is more commonly called ignorance, where a character is in the position of simply not knowing things about how the world works. Ged, who is the main character of Wizard of Earthsea, begins as a child living in a village in a state of ignorance, and sets out on the path of sort of knowledge and wisdom on the road to becoming a mage. It's very clear from the beginning of his journey that his spirit is sort of unpolished and rough and empty. He has a gift of power, which is recognized early, but he's just some kid. He's like a tabula rasa. He's a blank slate, and it's scrolled on by the people around him and by his deeper desires. And the story of the book is to some extent him learning the limits of himself as he is educated into the world of magery and the true speech, and explores the world of Earthsea, going to various places and so on, and learning some of their secrets. This is a fairly standard narrative for stories about young people growing into adulthood. It's sort of the quest to put together pieces of how the world works so that in the end you may make some beneficent impact on it. You can find the killer, or stop the victim, or save the city because you have paid attention and been educated either by yourself or by others, or some combination, into a state of knowing rather than a state of ignorance. So this sort of ignorance we might call blank ignorance, is the point from which Ged begins his tale. But there's another kind of ignorance, and it's the one that the heroine of Tombs of Atuan, who is known as Tenar, it's the one that she begins from. She begins from a state of wrong knowing. In the Tombs of Atuan, we come to a part of the world of Earthsea which is mentioned but not deeply explored in the first book. Most of Earthsea is roughly united by common culture and language. It's called the Archipelago and the Reaches, and although they don't share a political unity, they share social unity, and they can communicate with each other and they can understand each other fairly well. But there are 4 islands known as the Kargad lands, inhabited by different people who are xenophobic. Their attitude towards the archipelago is one of animosity and hostility. You get the impression that for anyone from the archipelago to even visit the Kargad lands is extremely risky, and vice versa. When the Kargads go out to the archipelago, it's usually in the role of raiders. So this is where Atuan is. Atuan is one of the Kargad islands, and the Tombs of Atuan are the center of the Kargad Empire. Although not the political center, they are sort of like the Holy of Holies, the religious, spiritual, cultural center, such that the secular rulers sort of pay homage and respect the tomb's power. They go back centuries, if not millennia, and they're sort of an occult spot where like the dark powers of the earth are strong, and where people have made these kind of like this dark alliance with these tombs going back generation after generation in order to staff the the tombs in order to sort of produce, acolytes. The Kargad people steal children when they're very young from their families and send them to be raised at the tombs to be sort of a permanent clergy for these dark powers. And our main character, Tanar, has had this happen when she was very young. She was known as Arha, and becomes renamed and given all of her education at the tombs in a sort of an attempt to create, a new artificial people who are only loyal to the tombs and who have left behind all other sense of self and all of their loyalties like that to family. And so they give them new names and they teach them according to their lights, and they make them live by their rules. They're essentially, a powerful cult, and from very, very early, Tanar has been living among them, and living in a privileged position. Something like how the Tibetan lamas are said to have chosen young children. Arha was selected to be the next sort of high priestess of the tombs, like the chief servant. And this is known from when she's very little. She's given special training. She's taught some of the secrets of the tombs, like the tombs are buildings above ground, but there's also this sort of secret ancient labyrinth below where the dark powers live and where various altars and sacred places exist. She knows the ways of these. She's expected not just to serve these dark powers, but to proselytize them and be their chief agent on Earth. And so she's selected partly for sort of like the innate strength of her spirit. And it's a really delicate job this cult has to do, and it parallels the actual experience of cults, in our world, which is you need competent leadership to hold the rest of the cult in line. So how do you have competent leadership while also maintaining sort of the rigmarole and the knowledge base of the cult? How do you have people who are good enough at the work of controlling the cult and deciding what it should do, and continuing its traditions, and able to engage with the outside world without then changing the cult, or perhaps altering it out of recognition, or even dissolving it. And so, the answer, as always, is to try to acculturate people to it from a very young age. And much of the book, perhaps the first half almost, is about the acculturation process, whereby, we see Tanar at various ages, starting, I think, at 6, going up to about 14, when she's given a new name and is, put into a position of at least nominal authority, although you get the sense that the older priestesses, 2 in particular, are still in charge. She at least nominally now is like the voice of these ancient powers. Alright, so we see different aspects of what it would be like to live in such a cult dedicated to a kind of unchanging, incurious ritual repetition. It's one of those places that is like sort of dark and ominous, and nothing ever changes. The other people involved, although there are hints, they do have a range of personalities. They're not robots, but they all share in the sort of the general obedience to the dark powers of the tombs, and there's no sense that rebellion or alteration is possible. The outside world's contact with the tombs is pretty much just sending tribute and hoping that they won't steal any of their children. The emperor just sort of like looks to them to bless his various piratical engagements. He doesn't seem to expect anything from them except that they sort of let him know if he's about to piss them off. And a young woman, who Arha, who becomes Tanar. I'll just call her Tanar going forward, her cult name. Tanar is aware. She's talented, she's smart, she's observant, and she has just the barest bits of memory of her life before being here, and just enough subjectivity, just enough ability to imagine the world otherwise, so as not to just fully accept this status quo. Um, she when she comes to her position of nominal power, she enjoys sort of the deference she gets, but not deeply. She enjoys ordering out around the older priestesses, but not deeply. Something about her is like looking for more. And that, about halfway through the book, is when Ged shows up. Ged is not the questing boy of Wizard of Earthsea. Ged is now, you get the impression, perhaps in his 30s, at least a decade after the events of Earthsea, and has become a much more genial person, much more at ease with himself and with his attitude to the world. He's not this kind of grim, driven kid with a chip on his shoulder who has a lot of power but a lot of uncertainty. He's more the complete mage who can sort of be himself and is at ease with how he thinks about his use of power. Ged has come here because in the tombs is said to be the second half of a object called the Ring of Ereth Akbe. In Earthsea, Ereth Akbe is something like, what would be the right? Gilgamesh? Alexander the Great. He's a legendary figure of the past, but one who was real, but who was, Charlemagne, whose deeds have become sort of mythologized. But he was real, and he had this arm bracelet that also had on it the Rune of Peace. And at some point, the ring was lost and broken in half. And since then, without the Rune of Peace, there's been kind of intermittent war in Earthsea ever since. So the idea is if the rune could be discovered, it might be a good first step towards resolving all of the conflicts that rive Earthsea to this day. In Wizard of Earthsea, and one of my favorite pieces of the book, Ged is just given one half of the Ring of Ereth Akbe. He's been shipwrecked on an island not far from the Kargan lands. An island that's really just like a sandbar with a tiny freshwater spring. And there are two people there who help him and nurse him back to health. And they've been living there for like 50 years. And as they don't recognize his speech, they have to communicate through sign language, and while he's recovering his strength and repairing his boat, one of them, the old woman, does at least lose some fear of him, enough to share some food, and she shows him a dress that belonged to a little girl, and Ged puts together this idea that these people might once have been like children, noble children who were left here in exile as part of like a political war between their families, or perhaps fled here and have been living here ever since because they were forgotten about. And she gives him this piece of metal, and he doesn't really think about it at the time. It's just kind of like, yeah, okay, I'm glad to know you. And he sets off on his own quests, and he doesn't really think about it again. But in the intermittent time between Wizard of Earthsea and Tombs of Atuan, he learns that it's actually half of the Ring of Ereth Akbe. And I think this is wonderful. I love it when major quest items are just sort of casually handed to the hero of the books when they're like doing something else, and they're just like, yeah, thanks, and they just shove it in a pocket. I just think it's playful and charming, and it contributes a lot to the sense of wonder and mystery that exists in Earthsea, as much as any fantasy realm that I can think of. Earthsea is just so well shaded with both, normal, real life. Like there's constantly just real work being done, real struggles with like just regular things like illness and sick animals and disaster and, raising children, just regular life, and then these touches of the, the wondrous. Um, Something about that is just emblematic in this, emblematized. Is that a word? I think so. Something about that is really emblematized by Ged just getting half of this long lost treasure while he's on some completely different quest. Anyway, he comes to realize that he has it, and um, he's sort of in his confident, um, you know, at ease in his power kind of phase, and he I don't think it's ever fully explained why, but he's that kind of guy. He does like to do big things. He's not driven by risk or by the need to prove himself as much when he's younger, but he does still, like an adventure, and he's got a taste for sort of trying to accomplish great things. So he's decided he's going to get the second half. It has been known, uh, apparently for some time, that the ring is at the Tombs of Atuan, or at least the second half. So he gets to Atuan. He's a good sailor, using his magic, no doubt. He manages to land safely. He gets to the tombs, and he goes into the labyrinth. And there are some just fantastically well written passages. Le Guin has, a great sense of atmosphere and also a very concise sense of writing. Nothing is overwritten or played too much for effect. There's descriptive passages, but they're not too long. There are long dialogue and dramatic passages, but nothing is like repeated or wasted. So even though these novels are quite short, less than 200 pages, the actual sequence of events in them is as much as novels twice their length. So Ged gets into the labyrinth. He's contesting with these dark powers. They are powerful. They are real. This is a fantasy universe. There are these ancient, nameless, evil powers crawling around under the earth. And Tenar sees him. You just got to imagine, she has this superior knowledge of the labyrinth, which she can use to sort of spy on him and to keep track on him. And, it's a labyrinth, and to some extent, of course, the labyrinth is a symbol for, entrapment. And what is your response to entrapment? Because your response will determine whether you get free or not. So Ged goes in. He's using his magic to sort of, light his staff like Gandalf in Moria, and he's looking in and out, and he doesn't spot Tenar. He may suspect he's being watched, but we see no sign of it. She's able to keep pretty good track of him as he goes to and fro. And, the impression is, of course, that the dark powers are sort of muddling him and making it impossible for him to find either the ring or to find his way back out. He eventually comes to some dead ends, and he just sort of chuckles. He just laughs to himself a little bit at, oh, I'm in this fix. And you can feel, for most of the rest of the book, you can feel the fascination that Ged holds for Tenar. Something about Ged's spirit and about his reaction to things is what she has been waiting for her whole life. This impression that there is another way to be, that there's more to the world, that it isn't all just these dry, dusty tombs with these old cult leaders, that you can be a different way, and there are different responses. And, she doesn't, there are a lot of very basic stuff that she doesn't know, or that she has learned wrong. This is where we get into the second kind of ignorance, which is wrong knowing. The cult has programmed her as best they can to know things wrong, to know limits where there are not limits, or to know, fears and rules that are not to be questioned, and to simply accept that. But because she was chosen partly for her spirit and partly for her strength, which they hope to turn to their advantage, she is able to not fully accept this. You get the sense, if time had gone on, perhaps she would have settled into the role as all that life could possibly offer her. But, she's only like 14 or 15. She's still capable of seeing someone like Ged and not seeing just an enemy who needs to be destroyed. She's able to see someone that she could learn something from about the world. And the passages of the book, when she gradually reveals her presence to him, of course, she's very, very careful. She doesn't, take any risks. She feels him out. These are wonderful passages because she's really suspicious, and Ged's response always is to be really honest and trusting. It's almost like he can hear what's really going on. He can imagine the life that she's had and imagine what she's asking from him, and how the fact that she's even speaking to him about this tells him that, she is looking for something from him that she can't get from the world around her. This is it's really well done. The dialogue they have is beautiful because he doesn't get offended or frightened. He doesn't take things out on her. He almost immediately sees himself as not a mentor, even just someone who might, be able to give her some answers to her questions, just a guide. And in exchange for the guidance that he provides, he tells her, everything. He tells her about the Ring of Earthsea. He shows her the half that he has. He tells her about the archipelago. He tells her about Majory, his magic, which, she's aware that it exists, but she thinks of it as sort of like an evil witchcraft. And he explains how that, he knows that Kargats think of it that way, but there is this other way to think about it. He's really non-confrontational. He does not accept any of the bids she makes for his disapproval or his hostility. He seems to know that is not what she needs and not what would serve, and that it's just her way of continuing the conversation, because she's speaking the only way that she's been spoken to for so long, which is in terms of, rules and disapproval and anger and hatred. And he talks. He just talks. He just talks and sings, and he does a little bit of illusory magic and this kind of thing. And she helps keep him alive. He's running out of food. He's down there for a long time, like I think at least a week, if not more, before she agrees to eventually help. And this is the rest of the book. Is she agrees to help, and they make an escape from the tombs and then from the island and out into the broader world. And I think, although Wizard of Earthsea might be a more sort of expansive and fun book, because like a lot of quest novels, it goes all over the place. Ged goes all these places and meets all these people, and he learns all this stuff, and he has all these fun scenes, whereas all the Tombs of Atuan, pretty much everything happens in one place.
You have your water bottle now?
It is the more profound book because it's closer to the kind of struggle that is just more difficult and more important to succeed in. Ged struggles with blank ignorance, which is what all of us struggle with. We begin from a position of knowing nothing, and we proceed through the world, and we learn to weigh and to judge what we're told, and to follow our nose, and to seek knowledge where we can find it. Ged has tons of good mentors, not always just the big ones, even just some of the small characters, like the woman who gives him the half of the Ring of Earthsea. He has a lot of help along the way, and it's a lot of fun, and it does lead eventually to a climactic struggle where everything he's learned helps him to sort of take a major step into the maturity of his life. But Tenar's struggle against the other kind of ignorance, the kind that is more dangerous because it so well masks itself as knowledge, is just to me much more moving right now. And her struggle to me is greater because she has never known trust. She has never known honesty. She has these tiny memories of her life with her mother, but there's no detail. It's just a reminder that things could have been different, that she could have just been raised in her home like a regular child. Everything since then has been some version of deception and lie and obedience to these dark powers who don't even care about humanity and just sort of keep them enthralled to their dark rituals. And there's just violence, and anyway, she manages to survive that. Her sense of what is right in life manages to survive long enough that when a guide like Ged comes along, she can listen to the voice inside her that tells her this is the thing to listen to. This is the thing that will let you out. This is how you get outside this net that you were dropped in when you were so tiny. She has to do it all herself. And it's never exactly explained why she can do it and other people in this cult can't, because we don't know why some people can do it and some can't. And it's great that there's no speech or anything where she like tells the Ged or implicitly tells the reader what it was that made her, made it possible for her to leave everything she's known. It's just who she is. It's part of being Tenar, and it's casting her fate to the wind. That kind of deep sense of life's adventure that springs on us, perhaps more at some ages than others, but that hopefully never really leaves us all the way. There is a moment in George Orwell's novel 1984 where Winston is, eating the crappy food and drinking the horrible gin, and has this moment of rebellion where he thinks life wasn't always like this once. There used to be abundance. We used to be healthy. We used to eat good food and drink good wine, and we used to wander and play, and humanity was something brighter. And when I think of the Tombs of Atuan, I imagine it as just a much more, long, sophisticated, well drawn out development of that kind of idea floating through Tenar's life, that even though this is everything she's ever known, on some level she knows that it's wrong and it's not really for her, and the person she's meant to be is out there somewhere else waiting to be found and embraced. And it's just a superb novel. Tenar comes back in one of the later Earthsea books, older, wiser. We will get to that, but first there is the third novel, The Farthest Shore, where Ged reappears as an older man. This is the final book in the original trilogy of Earthsea, which for a long time, were the only Earthsea books. But then later in life, Le Guin wrote a few more. So next time, The Farthest Shore.